Today, we are going to talk about diagnosis, what it means, how it came to be, how it's used for good and for the not so good. Today, I talk with trauma researcher Mary Catherine McDonald, PhD, about the DSM, that veritable Bible of mental health, and the sheer subjectivity with which it was conceived, written, and wielded by doctors and insurance companies alike. In particular, we focus on OCD. What causes it? No one knows, but because we can't help ourselves, we posit a few patently unprovable ideas. We also discuss the wonderful madness of Robin Williams, how to rebuke terrible questions, and what we think of people who like to tell other people who they are. And lastly, if you want to become a Patreon member, the link is in the program notes. What does being a Patreon member get you? Well, every once in a while I have a Q&A, and if you subscribe, you will get your questions about mental health answered on the air, and you will receive a worksheet pertaining to your fabulous question, and you may get to hear secret recorded bonus content. So subscribe. My name is Benjamin Russick, licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is my podcast, Look, Just Tell Me What to Do.
Okay, so I want to talk about diagnostics because this is an area that I think people don't know enough about. And I think psychology is one of these weird sciences where people think that because they're a human, they're an expert in psychology.
My therapist, Seymour, said that it's a delusion of mastery, that people use this language and they just try to sound like they're fucking smart.
Yeah. Delusion of mastery is really interesting because I think what's happening is that we over-pathologize each other and ourselves without really any actual data.
You wanted to talk about the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is a damn tongue twister, but that contains all the diagnoses of all mental disorders everywhere on the planet, and it's written by a bunch of people in a room somewhere who decided to agree on all the stuff. Like the DSM-3, which is 2 editions back, we're in the 5 now, which listed homosexuality as a disease. I guess they took that out.
Fun fact about the DSM, it was supposed to just be a brochure. It started out as a brochure. Literally. And it was supposed to be so that clinicians could talk to each other about their patients. So if you're practicing in California and you have a clinician friend in Massachusetts, you two can do research and try to figure out okay, when I look at this socioeconomic class of population, these symptoms tend to pop up more often than in this other one. And
Did it come in a glossy fold out with a boat on the picture of the boat on the cover?
We should find a picture of it. I don't know what it looks like.
You can be depressed here.
Right.
Go to this island.
A little pin thing. But it was just supposed to be so we could do research. This is another thing I think people don't really understand is that this isn't a fixed science. Mm-hmm. I mean, no science is fixed. But I think we treat psychology as if these entries in the DSM are fact. And what's real is that we are constantly changing based on the anecdotal evidence that comes in and also just new technologies that are discovered that allow us to see things differently. And it's changing all the time.
Can I talk about that for a second?
Absolutely.
So there's the field of epistemology.
Yes.
The study of knowledge, of knowing. And Seymour always talked about that.
Did he really?
Yeah, what do you know is real?
Yeah.
One thing he once said to me is he said, Ben, very few provable statements are useful.
Wow.
If you think about that for a minute, it kind of starts to work. When is it useful to say, to prove this thing?
Yep.
I mean, I guess you could prove that, gas works, but I guess philosophically speaking or psychologically speaking, he even challenged the idea of proofs. He said, I think a proof should be when you have just millions and millions of examples that support your point, not necessarily a mathematical thing that is sort of in its own little self-enclosed system.
Yeah.
When is something true? When you can point to something and say that right there? It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And we don't have any sense of that in the world.
And speaking of the delusion of mastery,
we were talking about this article about psychospeech and how people are incorporating the verbiage of psychology to sound like they know what the fuck they're talking about. Mm-hmm. They want to use these things to sound like they know.
Yeah.
And Seymour always said, beware of those who know. And so
they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. So we're sort of challenging doctrine right today. Anyway.
So it started out as this brochure. And it was supposed to be purely for clinicians to be able to talk to each other and to be able to do research and find out, here are some trends that we see that are worth understanding. Because before we had the advent of brain technology and a lot of the blood testing that we do, it was total hypothesis about what a disorder even was. And so it was for researchers and clinicians, and that's it. And then in the United States, the insurance companies got a hold of it, and they determined that, okay, we can figure out how to cover you. So if you have a biologically based illness like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, then we have to have parity with what we would cover you for if you had, lung cancer.
And it's almost like it became doctrine once it got welded to money.
Completely. Exactly.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting also that part of the reason that alcoholism got categorized as a disease, and that was actually them getting one over on the insurance companies, was that like, we'll say it's a disease.
Oh shit, I didn't know that.
And so that you have to treat it.
You have to cover.
You have to cover it.
Oh, wild.
Yeah. Well, also, I want to pause and say that when we say the word disease, what we mean is a collection of symptoms. People get confused about the word disease because it means that you are exhibiting these symptoms. For instance, like HIV is a virus. Right. The disease, AIDS, is a series of symptoms that if they appear, you have this disease. HIV happens to be the cause, but you can have a disease and you cannot know what the cause is. People have alcoholism, but we're not really sure what the cause is. The damning thing about the DSM is that depression, anxiety, bipolarism are just, you have to meet certain criteria like, okay, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're sad more days than not. Some of it's subjective because you can say, yeah, this person's definitely lost 20 pounds. This person definitely hasn't slept in 5 days. They're probably manic. But all it is a series of observations and self-reporting from the patient. That's all a disease is, period. Ever. Yeah. And then you have this thing called differential diagnosis where it means, well, these are the collection of symptoms. So this is probably depression, but on a differential scale, it might be bipolarism because maybe we're seeing the depressive end of this person's mania. Yep. Right. Or maybe they're on drugs. So a differential diagnosis means it could be several different things. These are the other things that it could be. Yep. And we have to rule those out.
And we have no blood test to be like, you have depression or you have whatever.
Because nobody fucking knows anything.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's guessing.
Yeah, it is.
And people, I don't know if you've known anyone who's got like 30 years under their belt in terms of psychiatric diagnostics. Most people that I've talked to say they still often get it wrong.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Because of that. Because these diagnoses are based on guesses.
Like one of the really tragic ones is schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and bipolarism, and even depression, because you can have psychotic symptoms if you're bipolar, when you're manic, and if you're depressed. You can have psychotic symptoms. And so they give them the wrong fucking meds.
You can also have it from being dehydrated.
Really? Only you would know that. The shit that I learned from MC. Drink your water, folks.
I mean like severe dehydration, but you can have a psychotic episode because of dehydration, which is wild. And it can also be situational. Like an incredible amount of stress can put you into a psychosis. So
I've been crazy for a few years now, is what you're saying?
Should we try to diagnose you?
You can diagnose me. I'm wearing a button-up blue shirt. I have curly hair.
Patient presents.
That's what is observable.
Do you write those things in your notes?
Never.
Like, patient is pleasantly dressed.
Patient in a pleasant mood. There's some weird word for the patient is normal feeling. What's that word? It's like.
I know what you mean, but I don't.
It's like
amenable or something.
No, it's even worse. It's like it starts with the EU.
Oh, the word is eurythmic, which sounds like the band The Eurythmics. But that's a totally different joke. So
it's like when they can say patient can walk, they say patient is ambulatory.
Right.
Patient can walk. Right. Why do you have to say ambulatory? Just he walked or she walked.
Right.
It happened. They
The dude stood up.
The dude stood up. Anyway.
Going back to like epistemology, there are these levels of knowledge, and philosophers will argue about this until the end of time.
They will literally do that until the end of time.
100%. They always have been arguing
like time
about
will end, and just before that, they will have been arguing about, hey, I think you're wrong. Wait, oh shit, it's the... Anyway. Go ahead.
So there's these different levels of expertise, beginner and amateur, and then an expert. And I forget the term for this, but there's this awareness, and they've done studies about this, that if you think that you are an expert, you're more likely to get things wrong.
Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yes. Than if you have a healthy understanding of what you might not know.
And it's not some deep spiritual thing. It's the people who know more have enough data to literally actually know how big their gaps are.
Right.
When I got my black belt in jiu-jitsu, I was like, oh my God, they gave me a black belt. They're out of their fucking minds.
Because you don't feel like you know anything?
You know you don't.
Right, right.
You can actually see it. It's not like you're humble. It's not like, oh, I'm this humble person and I'm just so spiritually enlightened that I realize I don't know. It's like, I just got my ass beat by a 14-year-old who has been doing jiu-jitsu since he was 2. Anyway, keep going.
So diagnosis is always differential. The experts know that they get it wrong a lot of the time because what they're looking at is a cluster of symptoms that's appearing. And also symptoms are not not fixed. There's a huge amount of variety in the way that someone presents with any particular disorder. Bipolar is a great example because you can have, and usually media gives us these stories of really extreme, the most extreme version of bipolar that you can have. Mania to the point of destroying your life, and then depression, again, to the point of destroying your life. And it's all really extreme. But when people actually come in with symptoms, they're often on this huge spectrum. And so the symptoms can kind of sneak by people. And weirdly, shifting symptoms has been one of the things that has caused a lot of aspersion to be cast onto the field.
For those of us that don't know what aspersion means, could you define
like
that?
Doubt.
Okay.
So like when
it's like ambulatory, but for
yeah,
doubt.
Exactly. I'm doing
aspersion.
The thing.
Okay. Big word.
Cast aspersion. So like for the entry of trauma, which is the one that I know the most about, obviously, when the symptoms didn't match, when patients would come in and their symptoms wouldn't match exactly, instead of being like, oh, maybe we've got something wrong and we need to expand our definition, or something has changed like in society, which is changing the symptom, usually what happened is those patients were just assumed to either have something else or be lying. And that's wild, because who would do that? Malingering. That was a real thing.
What is malingering?
That you're basically faking it because you want to get out of something else. And so it's kind of like the psychological equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot so you don't have to get drafted.
You know the Catch-22?
Like the book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know how it worked?
I don't remember.
The idea was that they would go on these bombing runs, dump their load, and come back. And it was really dangerous because they would fly over, battlefields, and they were just targets. They had no defense. They would just get shot at. And so it was this really, really dangerous thing to do. The only way to not go on these bombing runs was to be declared insane.
Oh.
And so the way you would be declared insane is you'd go in and you'd say, hey, and insanity was not having any regard for your own well-being. So you go to the doctor, you'd say, hey, I am going on these bombing runs. I clearly have no regard for my own well-being, so you have to ground me. The doctor would say, okay. But unfortunately, as soon as they would ground him, that would show that the patient had regard for his own well-being, and they'd send him back up.
Oh, wow. I've never heard that.
I don't know if that's an actual historic fact.
Sure,
It was from the book, and it's really kind of funny. It's like this early example, I guess, of malingering, sort of.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then that backfires immediately.
Anyway, so keep going. So malingering.
I can't even remember why we were talking about malingering.
The doctors were assuming that they were faking it.
Because they didn't have like a category that was neat enough to fit the...
Right. It's kind of like there's this other category in diagnosing called NOS, which means not otherwise specified. So it's like if somebody got schizophrenia, but let's say they only go crazy for like 6 days and then they're fine, and then they go crazy for another 6 days, and it doesn't seem to fit any of the normal patterns, and so they don't get it, so they just write not otherwise specified. They do that for everything. Like there's personality disorder not otherwise specified. It's like, okay, this person's clearly whack, but we're not really sure, so we're just going to put you in this bucket.
We've got disorganized behavior, but we can't quite pin it down. What do you think the most common self-diagnosis that is wrong is?
Ooh, what a question. I think ADHD.
You do? Yeah, me too.
People always talk about it.
Yeah.
Now, I have patients in the past who have correctly diagnosed with themselves the ADHD. They go on meds, and holy shit.
Life changes.
Yeah. Quick, right? They can focus, they can do the things, right? Stay present, all that. But
like not everyone on earth has it.
I think another thing I see with clinicians is that they really like to talk about patients being on the spectrum. I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Spectrum disorders have become like this weird bucket. The therapists do this too, where if they see something they don't understand, my sense is it must be on the spectrum. Or if this person has an odd personality, they're on the spectrum. It's like the NOS thing. It's like you just don't know.
Right.
Why can't you just say, yeah, he's that?
Right.
I don't really see I don't know what I'm seeing. But like I had a patient once said, Ben, I really love you because you're able to say I don't know.
Yes.
And honestly, I just say I don't know because I don't want to get in trouble.
And I think clinicians sometimes we like to think that it's all ego, and I think a lot of times it is ego, but there are also a lot of times where a clinician is in the room with a heartbreaking patient and has no understanding of what's going on. And so I think
heartbreaking?
Yeah, just like there's a heartbreaking set of symptoms that don't seem to make sense or that have never crossed their...
And they want to help.
Yeah, they want to help. And so they're like, okay, it must be this. Let's go with this diagnosis.
One thing that you see a lot in my field, especially when I worked in addiction, because I saw so many somatic issues. That means somatic is like of the body. You see the limits of medicine.
Yeah, right.
And you realize that we're kind of in the Stone Age.
Yeah, we are. That's a humbling thing when you go to a doctor and they say, like, not only do I not understand, but the entire medical community has no idea what's going on.
Or like, here, we'll try this cream on your, or take this one pill. Let's just see what happens.
Right. We'll give it a shot.
The thing is that most people go in for routine stuff, like the stuff that we do fix, like broken arms, broken legs, certain basic medications we do over and over again. So everybody has this illusion that the medical stuff is just sort of all encompassing, and it's really not.
And that medicine is fact. And so you go to a doctor and you get a fact. Here, I have a symptom. Let me go get this fact. And I'm going to go to a psychologist and let me get this fact. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Truth be told, it would be a lot easier for everyone if we had simple problems, but it's almost never as simple as here's your diagnosis, here's the pill, it's done. Even in that case, even when it is that simple, you still need to do a bunch of integration around what it is to have whatever it is.
Yeah, I've talked a lot about precision versus clarity. And precision is the complementary opposite of clarity. So as you get more precise, you lose clarity. As you move in to see the small thing, as to, do surgery on the bone, to do this, to do that, you lose the larger picture. And as you stand back and look at the whole patient, look at all the symptoms together and their whole life and their whole thing, you lose precision. Those two things, you can get lost in either of them because you have some doctors that are horribly imprecise who just sort of stand back and say, okay, well, this is clearly stress related and your and your socioeconomic position. It's like, no, man, like his, he's bleeding out of his fingernails. Like there's something's clearly going on here, right? So, and it goes back and forth where you have doctors who do like, they'll want to do surgery on every freaking thing. Yeah. And it's like, again, that's super precise, but you're missing the forest for the trees type thing.
I love the way you frame that up. The thing that I always say that's kind of similar is about reductive explanations. And this comes from the person that I studied the most when I was writing my dissertation was Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who is a phenomenologist. Have you ever heard of the case of Schneider? He was actually a combat veteran. This was like 1945 or something. He had all these physical things going on that no one could explain. And Merleau-Ponty reanalyzed his whole case and figured out that what was going on was more psychological and therefore still bodied. Like there's not actually a split between the mind and the body. So he was anti-dualism, this idea that we have a separate mind and body. They actually influence each other. And he was also very pro-science, but anti-scientism. And scientism is the idea that you will have a reductive explanation that will explain something. And if you don't have a reductive explanation, it's just because the science hasn't gotten there yet.
Oh, Seymour talked about people being scientistic.
Yeah.
Science-like.
What was his take?
It's similar. It's like the delusion of mastery thing.
Yeah,
like
it's too reductive.
We're gonna find a thing here and say what this is, so that we can say that there's a thing there, and so that I can sound like I know what I'm talking about, and we can just move on to the next human or next problem.
And I used to get this like when I first started like giving lectures and stuff about PTSD. People weren't really talking about trauma as much as they are now. And I would get that question every single time I presented. And someone would say, what are you going to do when we figure out the pill or when we figure out how to prevent trauma? And it was like, what?
I mean, the question is insane.
It sets up a philosophical construct that is false.
Right.
And that's the thing people don't realize about when someone asks you a question, because as soon as you answer a question like that, you've accepted the premise
of the question,
which is that a pill can do something about that. This is crazy.
Yeah.
Seymour often used to say, I disagree with the question.
I love that.
I do that to people and they're like, well, you can't say that. And then his other thing was, well, you're not in charge of this conversation, are you?
Boom.
Like, well, yeah, no, you're not. It's two people having a conversation and there's no rules, motherfucker. I mean, we're both speaking English, but that's about it.
Right. Oh man, that's fascinating.
Yeah, you would have liked him.
Yeah, no, he sounds like a hoot.
Do you have any stories that illustrate your point about people being reductive?
There's a lot of clients, I'm sure you see this too, increasingly, who are really convinced that they have a diagnosis that is going to explain everything. I'm thinking of a client in particular who for sure has some elements of OCD and also has a lot of other stuff. And so getting the belief across, just as let me plant a seed that it's possible that not all of your problems come from OCD, which I think gives us kind of a picture of the upshot of being too reductive, is that then if you have a problem, so like let's say I have a diagnosis of OCD. Now if I have a problem, I can blame it on OCD because I know that I have that thing. And it's like, well, then you're actually missing what's happening, which could be because of something completely different. The thing that I'm thinking of, somebody who has OCD and struggles with that and also has a pattern of relationship behavior that is really unhealthy and has nothing to do with OCD.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, you're convinced that you have this diagnosis. And it's true. I'm not trying to take that away from you, but we need to be able to look at this relationship pattern from a more holistic perspective.
Right.
You know what I mean?
What do you think causes OCD? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I don't know that my thoughts on this are like fair because I have OCD.
You do?
I do.
May I ask what kind?
It's just very mild. It's usually comes up as like health anxiety and cleanliness stuff.
So germ phobia a little bit?
Germ phobia, for sure. Less about like other people and more about I will have something that will end me prematurely.
So a little hypochondria? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, but it doesn't feel to me like classic hypochondria. It's more like really wild health anxiety that I notice really spikes when I feel a lot more anxiety in my life.
My theory is that OCD is basically a way of mitigating anxiety.
100%. Health anxiety comes from a whole string of people in my life dying almost immediately.
Right.
But I have a OCD in my house about where things are placed.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why I'm laughing. This is like a really dark story. But one of the things that was really terrifying in the house I grew up in was that my mom would go into these rages and she would trash my room because it wasn't clean in the right way. But she would never let me know what that meant. And really, looking back now, she just had a lot of rage and she was out of control. And so she was trashing my room. It had nothing to do with the secret rule that I broke. But in my house, things have to be in a place that feels good or I feel bad. And that logic makes no sense to anyone else.
Right.
And it's something that I've gotten a lot of work done on, and it doesn't control my life. So I don't need to take medication. I can like function and have other people in my house and all this other stuff. But when I'm struggling with stuff in my life that feels out of control, it gets worse. And I will end up kind of rearranging and cleaning my house for like 4 hours to try to make it like feel okay.
Right.
And that I think just comes from being terrified as a child. Like,
yeah, I knew someone like that. They were horribly impoverished and they had to live in absolute squalor at some stranger's house. It was fucking gross.
That's awful.
Like, you know, crap in the bathtub and like just like some of the worst stuff I think I've ever heard. And it was like when she was 11, 12. She had germ phobia after that,
Sure.
where it started to develop, and I get it.
Yeah. It's like an overcorrection. Like you had no control over the situation as a child. And so your psyche is like, oh, we're just going to have control forever. In this extreme
well,
way.
now I often talk about externalization, like when you can't go within to heal.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that somebody with OCD is disconnected from their inner world. I'm just saying that externalization is one form of healing. So in the moment when you're feeling out of control and you go and control the thing, you feel just a second of like probably 100%. Dopamine like relief for just a microsecond.
Totally.
I would imagine.
Oh my God, yeah. You know, having a lot of awareness about it now, which I totally was not aware of for years, like until recently. Having awareness of it allows me to see it from the outside, and I can see what I'm doing with, which both like makes it more and less uncomfortable at the same time, because it's like, okay, I am compulsively cleaning and rearranging and I cannot stop. I really feel like I can't stop because something bad will happen. That's kind of the marker to me of OCD, like from a lived perspective, is that if you don't do the thing, something bad's going to happen. You're out of control or there's terror or whatever.
Fascinating. And again, you guys can hear it's me and MC are talking about, well, here's this OCD stuff and she has it and I'm, you know, a clinician and I live with someone who had it and we don't get it. We kind of get it. We have ideas, but we don't really know. Like we don't really know where it comes from really. We're just having ideas.
Right.
Like we're not.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Totally. And I had a fight with a psychiatrist once because I went in, this was like I had moved. And so I went to a new psychiatrist because I was in a new state. You get all these assessments and you take all these tests. And I showed up as having OCD, which I know, and he wanted to medicate it. And I said, it's not disrupting my life. There's no distress. This is currently something that I feel like I can control because I was there for panic disorder. And he was really pushing back, like, you need to be medicated. And I was like, why? Which is another huge thing about diagnostics, which gets really complicated because who decides what distress looks like?
Right. Who decides? I was hearing this thing on pain. Like, how do you decide what pain is?
I think the liberal-minded folks who are listening will be like, well, the patient decides who's, you know, in distress. But that gets complicated when you've got someone with bipolar mania who feels great.
Yes, it does.
And is destroying their life.
Do you think that doctor was on a power trip, or do you think he was concerned, or what do you think? Where do you think his thing was coming from? We're diagnosing him. That was a behavior. That was a neurotic behavior.
That was a neurotic.
He had a disease, and we are figuring out what the disease is, folks.
He was a trip. I actually wrote about him in the book because it was the worst experience I've had incredible luck with therapists and psychiatrists. Like,
really?
Yeah.
You're the only one.
I know. People have the worst horror story, but I have just like found the best people for whatever I was dealing with, except for this guy. So that was like our second appointment or something. You do all the like testing and then you come in for the follow-up or whatever. He was a cowboy. He was a lot like older. This was in a southern state, but he was educated from Harvard. So I had done my research. Like he had an impressive pedigree, but he was absolutely the worst clinician I've ever seen. He told me like I was starting to go through the very slow, horrifying shattering of my marriage. And it was a really complicated situation. And I was like on session 3 or 4, and I was starting to delve more into detail about what was going on. And he sat back in his chair and he's like, it's always the same shit with you, isn't it?
What an asshole.
And I got up and I was just like, we're done.
Like, good.
This is session. First of all, I can come for 15 years and talk about the shattering of my marriage. Like,
if that's what you need to do.
Exactly, right?
Do.
Like that's not. And then he immediately was like, well, this is your resistance.
This is the thing. I heard Patrick Stewart say something cool once.
He's so great.
He's so amazing. He was in an interview where the interviewer asked him what stigma or what did he think about the fact that he had to play a gay character in a movie, and how did he think that would affect his career. And he said, when I looked at the interviewer and I said, I think that the question really says more about the interviewer than the answer would ever say about me.
Burn.
Yeah, pain. So oftentimes, like when people say shit like that, their position, they're saying, hey, look at this thing about yourself. Mm-hmm. And in the way they're doing it, they're stating something about themselves that's far more potent than any response you could give.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the time, when somebody's coming at you with their knowledge, they're taking all their clothes off and they're sort of masturbating in front of you. Like it's like, stop that. You're embarrassing yourself and you don't know it.
And that's really inappropriate. Yeah.
And it's amazing to watch how often people will do that. They'll tell you who you are in the middle of a conversation to kind of get one over on you.
Right. And you're like, I'm sorry, what?
Like, even if you're right, the fact that you're making that move means that you're a fucking asshole.
Yeah.
And more than the crime of the thing is that you don't know that you're committing a crime.
Right.
You don't know that you're being a little bitch. Excuse me. You don't know that you're doing that.
Right.
And that's so much worse.
Yeah. It's so much worse.
Oh.
I was really lucky in that situation because of where I was, both in like my own growth and also my understanding of the field, that I knew he was full of shit. But if I had come to him 5 years earlier, I wouldn't have known he was full of shit. Right. I would have thought he was right.
I'm not going to even get into the whole gender power dynamic thing. But
I know.
That's another podcast. Next subject?
Yes. I'm so stuck on, because I'm sure you have to send patients sometimes to get, a psychiatric evaluation.
Yeah.
And they can be really harmful.
The evaluations?
Yeah. Well, depending on the clinician. And
what's your question?
Are you ever nervous sending someone? How do you send a patient to get a psychiatric?
Oh, no, I'm not nervous about that.
Okay.
No. Usually, well, there's a couple things. There's neuropsych assessment, which is like a battery of tests, like a 3-hour thing where you sit and you decide, whether or not you have personality disorder or which personality traits you have, or you're bipolar. And it's just a whole battery of tests. It's hard to get people to sit for those things. Usually what I send them to is it's just a psychiatrist for meds. But what I say is, look, I am not necessarily in favor of meds. What I am saying is that it can be useful to talk to a psychiatrist if in the event that you feel that you need to be medicated, or that you are having panic attacks, or you need a specific prescription, you will have already spoken to a psychiatrist, and you, the patient, will have the power to manage your own care. And I always use this phrase, you'll have this psychiatrist in your back pocket if needed.
Yeah.
So that's how I frame it.
That's a great way to frame that up.
I never frame it as you need to go in and we need to figure out what the fuck's wrong with you. If I were to send someone to psychosocial assessment, it would be, hey, we're just trying to get information here. And I always explain diagnosis, and I go on a thing.
Me too.
Yeah, I don't just do that shit casually.
Yep, same.
So I'm never afraid.
What's your thing? Can you
I'm doing it right now.
Okay, yeah.
This is the thing.
Yeah.
I talk to them just like this.
Yeah.
Because it is that. You are in control. It's your body. It's your mind. The people, these people that do these things are just humans with their little measuring sticks, whatnot. We also do a little thing on a primer on how to use this. Let's say they test you and there's some kind of disability. Well, how can you use that?
Right.
How can you use that to your advantage? What kind of exceptions can you get for school, work? Who knows?
Right.
Use it.
Yep.
Let's do this thing.
Yep. Let's make your life a little easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That shit's powerful, man.
Totally.
But yeah, and if they ever put up resistance, I never push. If they say no, and I don't, like if someone says, yeah, I'm not really not into meds, I really don't like psychiatrists, I bring it up again 0 times.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like, no.
Did that answer your question?
It does.
All
There's
right.
3 things I do, something very similar. There's 3 things that I add, which I think you probably also say. One is that just this background of, diagnostics is sometimes presented as if it's this perfect science. It's very much an imperfect science. A good clinician will say that and present you with your data in a way that is indicative that it's more complicated than whatever they're trying to diagnose you with.
Right.
2 is that diagnostics are sometimes wrong, and it can be helpful to get a second opinion if something comes up that's totally whack, because I've seen that happen too, where someone comes forward and I'm like, I've known you for a year and a half, like I can't diagnose you, but you 100% don't have that. Let's get somebody else. That's rare, but it has happened. And I think it's important to look at it like a medical diagnosis. If you got a diagnosis of some terminal illness, you'd get a second opinion, and the doctor would recommend that you get a second opinion. I am not casting shade on the fact that you're not a licensed clinical psychologist. No, I'm not a licensed clinical.
Okay.
I always am super clear about that.
Yeah, I know that. And so my question is how do you, when you're working with somebody, you have the knowledge of a psychologist without question to me, but you're not able to pull levers,
right?
Even the way I am, and I'm just an MFT. Yeah. Right. So how do you do that?
With the patient or with clinicians?
With patients and clinicians.
I kind of act like a patient advocate. And I say to the patient, number 1, I can't diagnose you. I can present to you what I've seen in the research. And usually what I'm presenting is like, here's what this side says, and then here's what the other side says. So I'm kind of like problematizing something rather than saying like, here is what you have. And then with clinicians, I've never had an issue. Usually I'm referring someone out, someone has to sign. If you want other clinicians to be able to talk to each other, you have to sign a waiver. And so I'll explain that to the client, say that they don't have to at all, but if they want to, they can share their results with me. I can interface with their clinician. And I've never had an issue. I think because I'm just so like, I'm almost in the advocate position, which is a lot less like charge.
And you're also really nice.
Oh, thank you. But I think it's like, I'm not presenting it like I know the thing and they don't know the thing, and you should go to this person because I know this is wrong with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but there also have been cases where it's very clear that a client has something that I have a really strong suspicion that they have that is getting in the way, and there's a treatment path that's available to them that I know about. And I'm like, if you go take this, here's what I think is going on. If you take this treatment path, I think this will happen. And that has usually borne out pretty well. And then the third thing that I talk about, which I know you talk about too, and you didn't mention, is this idea that like you can be in remission from a psychiatric thing. And that's, I think, something that most clinicians, like I've never heard, other than you, I've talked to you about that. I've never heard anyone else talk about that.
What do you mean? I know what do you mean by like?
Let's say you have major depressive disorder. If you get that diagnosis, it doesn't mean you're going to have depression your entire life.
Sure, yeah.
And even if you have bipolar disorder,
you can be in remission.
Totally.
Or you can be in remission from schizophrenia.
Right. Meaning you have it managed and you don't have any breakthrough symptoms that are disruptive. But I don't think that's offered up enough. So I think people get really freaked out because they're like...
Yeah, I got a question on my my Q&A. It was that he said, once you get depression, are you going to have that forever?
Yeah.
And it's like,
no.
People just think that the problem is that diagnosis got wrapped up, psychological diagnosis got wrapped up in people's brains with physical ailments in a way that doesn't work.
Right.
It's sort of like, look, if you have a broken leg, right? You have a broken leg and it will be a broken leg until it heals.
Yep.
If you have cancer or well, not cancer is a bad example because it's
cancer is a good example because you can be in remission.
Yeah, I know. But what I mean to say is that most things people think about, well, I take this pill, I do this thing and it goes away. Or I keep it at bay.
Right.
And there's something about the idea that when you mention, I have cancer, I have a tumor, I have a broken leg, I have this flu, I have HIV, I have what I have. This is this thing and it's in my body. It's a real biochemical switch has been thrown.
Yep.
That is in a sense permanent because it's an indelible part of my body, right? It is undeniably there. You can measure it with a stick, right?
Yeah.
Very small stick. But and that sort of relationship, it's not even the silver bullet thing. It's the relationship to how we think of us having a thing. And so that sort of, this is hard to talk about, that sort of frame is put on psychology and it doesn't fucking work because psychology is completely freaking subjective most of the time and fluid. And it's just a totally different deal.
Right.
And all these people walking around with all their fucking psychobabble, thinking they know a thing, because they know what a goddamn stub toe is.
Right.
Am I making any sense?
You're totally making sense.
I can't tell.
There was a Robin Williams thing where he's like,
there's always a Robin Williams thing.
There's always a Robin Williams. He's playing like
he covered every topic. he covered that. I was lucky enough to run into Robin Williams a few times in Marin County.
Really?
At the Java Hut outside in Fairfax, that little cafe.
Seriously?
In the middle. Yeah, because he would go there and park his car and ride up the hill.
Oh, up Tamarancho.
Yeah, and he was out of his mind, and he was lovely. He would not stop telling jokes.
Oh my God.
He was standing in line, and the barista was like, "Okay, do you want this 6 bottles, this and this and this and this and this?" And he goes, "Yeah, 6 bottles of water, Jack and Coke, a flow chart," because they were all women.
Yeah,
and he would just ramble off like. He couldn't stop. He could not stop.
Yeah.
Honestly, 40% of it made no sense at all.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
I don't understand that. And I think it was just above my head. Anyway, he covered every topic.
Yep.
Because he was madman. So what did he say?
He said, I'm on this whole other tangent. Do you know about the Praecox feeling?
What?
We'll come back to this.
Praecox?
Do you know what this is?
I think of a peacock, an image of a peacock with a crown on and with a stethoscope just popped into my head. What is a praecox?
The praecox notion, I can't remember, this is from the 1800s. They were studying studies about diagnosis and how reliable diagnostics was. And one of the things you can really test that with is someone who's schizophrenic, especially if their schizophrenia is out of control, because folks who have schizophrenia are in this reality and another reality at the same time.
Yeah.
They did the study about diagnosing schizophrenia and which diagnostic instrument was most reliable. And they came up with this term, the Praecox feeling, which is this idea that within about 15 minutes of being with someone, you could tell whether they have schizophrenia with 85% validity.
Wow.
That's a random boring fact. But I'm just thinking about when you said that, because I don't know if you've spent time around folks who have schizophrenia, but you're trying to kind of track, and then they will land in reality and something really profound happens, and then they will leave.
Oh, so it's very measurable. Yeah. Yeah, I will say that diagnosis, even though we're bagging on it, is incredibly useful because it's like signposts.
Right. Yeah. It can give you a really clear picture, which then can help you help the person. But I was just, for some reason, it made me think of that because I was thinking man, I don't expect Robin Williams to be someone who only makes sense 40% of the time.
Yeah. Oh.
But he was so...
Well, he's popping in and out of reality in a way?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or he's so fast that you're only catching up with his reality every...
I don't know. I will say that all the rumors about him are fucking true. He was just unbelievably smart.
Someone said he was, I don't know if it was Oprah, said he was nearly impossible to interview because you just have no control.
Yeah. That's the feeling I got. I ran into the man 6 or 7 times, so I got a feeling for it, which is a really privilege.
That's wild.
To be able to have done that. It was kind of like a dog would walk up and he'd pet the dog and go woo woo, and he would bow wowing like the dog.
Yeah.
Or Hispanic folk walked up and he's like, oh, see, he just couldn't.
Yeah, nothing.
It was he would depart.
Yeah.
I don't know what would you diagnose that as?
Oh, I have no idea.
Robin Williamsism.
Robin Williamsism.
I don't know.
But anyway, I was going to say about Robin Williams, I don't know if we should cut out that whole part about Robin Williams.
No, we should keep it.
Because it sounds like I'm saying he has schizophrenia or had schizophrenia. I did not. That's not what I mean at all. It just reminded me of that.
Okay.
Talking about diagnostics. But he had this thing where there was some skit and he was playing a drunk person. And
that must have been easy for him.
Right. Stumbling around and he's going, you don't know fuck about shit. And I think about that phrase all the time because I'm like, none of us know fuck about shit, you know?
Yeah, I could name that. I could name the podcast. You don't know fuck about shit.
You don't know fuck about shit. But then we're on Instagram and we're diagnosing ourselves and each other, and it's really corrosive.
Yeah, it is.
Because we don't know fuck about shit, and we don't know that we don't know fuck about shit, and so we're just out here doing harm.
You know what it reminds me of? One of the best books written on psychology isn't about psychology, and it's called Adventures in the Screen Trade.
Okay.
And he talks about how people fail upwards in Hollywood, they fail and they get promoted.
Yeah.
And just all the insanity. And everyone's trying to figure out what makes a hit.
Yeah.
And what works and why someone becomes famous and what the thing is.
Yeah.
And he has this, and he says, let me say something. And he writes in all caps on the page, nobody knows anything. And the next paragraph is, wait a minute, that bears repeating. And he just, nobody knows anything.
Wild.
So
That's such a good parallel for the field, which is also like, I don't want to leave people with this idea that it's like no one has any idea of what's going on.
They don't. And again, diagnosis is incredibly useful. Like I can look at, they have there's this whole system where you look at the axis 1 through 5.
Oh, they just destroyed that.
They did, which is weird to me because it was useful. But it was like axis 1 were like mood disorders like anxiety, depression, whatever, bipolarism. Axis 2 was personality disorders. Axis 3 was physical ailments like, has liver cancer. Axis 4 was socioeconomic environment, and axis 5 was their functionality in the world. You could look at an axis 5 thing and get a thumbnail sketch of a person in 30 seconds.
Yep.
And it was useful.
Totally useful. Because then you can also see the context and, okay, how much is their environment impacting?
Like if someone is diagnosed with, alcoholism disorder and then, rule out, which means make sure it's not their borderline personality disorder. Well, you've got a case on your hands because that means that this person was getting pretty wildly intoxicated, probably is in remission, and may have been a fucking crazy person because they were drinking.
Right.
Or
and
maybe,
and that's why
just be a fucking crazy person.
Right. And that's why there's the behavioral pattern is the situation.
Anyway, so it's really, really useful. But again, when I hear a diagnosis, I see way past it.
Yeah. It's a beginning point. It's like a doorway.
It's a doorway.
Yep.
It's a doorway. Yep. There's another diagnosis I want to put in the DSM, which is people who are addicted to restaurants. Like they're addicted to restaurants.
Like they can't eat at home?
They love going out to eat. They go out all the time.
Isn't that just a hobby? How is that?
Because it feels like an addiction to me because they don't ever stop. They're like, they don't have enough money and they're like,
they're taking over their lives.
They just always talk about this restaurant, that restaurant. I'm kind of making fun of it, but like, and actually a guy I know, his name is Sam. He's a very smart dude. He said that San Francisco's full of transplants and it's possible that people are just looking for family. Like it's family for them. All these people are going out to eat. Like you see these parties of like, all these folks. And
they just want to feel like they're in like the kitchen with their family.
Something.
I've lived in New York and LA and here, and I don't live in the city, but there's a lot of lonely folks.
Yeah, I grew up here. So my mom's like 20-minute walk from here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's weird. Is that weird?
It is weird.
Does she swing by?
No, my mother does not swing. No, she doesn't. She's kind of a crone in the castle. Like she holds court. You go. She's like the queen. You go to the palace. You don't. The queen entertains.
Yeah.
The queen does not come to your house. You go to her house. She makes you tea.
Yeah.
She asks you how you're doing. She gives you the packages that have shown up on the front porch because you're afraid to have them sent to your door because they'll get stolen. She asks you how you've been. You dating anybody? No, Mom. She actually never asked me that. But
she doesn't.
No, she doesn't.
Do you think that takes restraint on her part?
No, I don't think she wants to know. Weirdly, that's a whole thing. I don't know. In my family, talking about relationships, especially with women, it has always been taboo, and I can't tell if it's something that germinated when I was a child and grew into my own personal narrative, or if it's a real narrative that's in the family.
Oh, interesting.
I think it's mostly my shit.
You should ask her.
I'm okay. I'm going to ask her. Will you remind me to ask her?
I'm just curious.
I'm curious too.
If so, why is that taboo? There's so many reasons it could be,
I don't know, man.
It's so much easier to be curious about someone else's family dynamic than your own. So,
Oh my God. Now we're in my own shit. What's your next item?
The other thing I want to talk about is that all of this being said, if we could peel away everybody's impulse to diagnose themselves and each other, I think it's really helpful and important to look at what's there and to notice trends, both in yourself and other people. I teach a class that covers abnormal psychology, and I have to give a whole week about how, we're going to look at all these things. This is called medical students' disease. Everyone thinks they have everything as soon as they start reading because they're like, oh my God, I have felt one time this way. And it's like, well, this is a personality disorder. So that means you have to have all of the symptoms across all areas of your life for an extended period.
And if you had a personality disorder, you probably wouldn't even be saying any of that shit.
Right. Exactly. That's a good point. So you can't diagnose everyone as a narcissist. However, it's really helpful to notice what the trends are and what narcissistic behavior is so that you can identify it, because even if the person you're dealing with isn't a narcissist, that behavior can be really corrosive to intimacy. Just as one example.
Traits.
Yeah. So it's not like I want to peel away the DSM from everybody. What I want them to understand is that it's a nuanced, imperfect thing. And that if you look at it, instead of trying to reduce people, including yourself, to diagnostic codes.
I've upset quite a few people in my life by saying, hey, that's pretty narcissistic behavior.
I know.
You called me a narcissist.
I know.
No, I didn't. And I understand because it's pretty fucking close. Narcissist, like it's like 2 letters.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So I get it. And I have to slow down and say, okay, I'm sorry I said that. This is what I mean.
Right.
Like, I have narcissistic behaviors, you know. Like,
everyone does.
I'm a fucking podcaster, for God's sakes. You know?
Everyone does. Everyone has all the traits. It's just that you don't have them in an organized fashion across all areas.
Some more than life. Like I'm narcissistic and avoidant. Those are my traits.
You think?
Oh, for sure.
How does that like show up?
Avoidance?
Yeah.
I don't like meeting new people. I don't like talking to strangers in public. I don't like new situations. I don't like change. I'm socially awkward, and I'd prefer to stay indoors and hide from the world, which is weird because it's in direct opposition to my narcissistic desire to be kind of on stage and have all the lights on me.
We all contain multitudes.
We do. I think there's also a certain safety of being the center of attention because then you're in control in a way.
Oh, interesting.
So in other words, like avoidance is like you're worried about what people are going to do, but if you're the center of attention, if you're loved, you're not going to get hurt. I love being on stage.
I hate it.
Oh, put me in front of 10 million people. I'll be cool as a cucumber.
I get so, like, my whole nervous system like tries to revolt when I am in the spotlight in any capacity. Yeah. Releasing a book has been the most uncomfortable thing I've done.
Speak on that.
First of all, this is going to sound like bullshit, but it's really true. The book is about the work. It's not about me. Like, I have gathered all this knowledge that I think will be helpful. And so I wanted to get it out to as many people as possible, which is why I did a trade book instead of an academic book, which I've written before and nobody reads because they're $500. And they're also written for academic audiences, which is stupid. But people want you. You wrote the book. They want more of your story. They want your face. They want you on camera. They want you on the podcast, which, like, I'm super grateful for all of those opportunities. I'm not trying to say that it's a bad thing, but I break out in hives. My body is like, what are you doing?
You said that happened to you on a podcast recently.
Get out of the spotlight. Yeah.
Where you actually broke out in hives.
Yeah.
You can actually see it in the video.
You can see it in the video. Yeah.
Your neck is bright red.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's, raised, painful, true hives. Like, it's not just like blush response.
I don't give you hives, do I?
No. Now I'm going to get them because we're talking about it. Do I have hives right now?
I don't see any hives.
Okay. You can watch. They're going to come.
Also, you had a TikTok video go wildly viral recently, and that made you really uncomfortable.
It's got 1.6 million views
Woo!
right now. And I have someone who helps me with social media because I'm just kind of an idiot when it comes to that. And I had to like text her and be like, I have to turn this off. Like, I can't.
You turned off the video?
No. I turned off my like phone and didn't look at it because I couldn't watch people watch me.
Oh man.
Like, it's so uncomfortable. And like, I'll get over it, and it's helpful. It's good to be pushed against this boundary or this limit because I can grow beyond it.
Change is never comfortable.
It's not. And I just think I survived my upbringing by hiding. And so it's kind of pushing on all of these more primitive things where it's, you're going to get in trouble. Like, you can't stand in the spotlight. You're going to get in trouble, And it's like, shit.
Wow. Well, anyway, what's next?
That's all I had.
That's all you had?
That's all I had. Do you have any other burning things about diagnostics?
Burning.
Let's talk about medication a little bit more.
Okay, please.
One of the benefits in not being a clinical psychologist is that I operate as a coach, which means I can disclose more than...
Can I tell one story?
Yes.
Before we do medication?
Go for it.
So I want to say one last thing about diagnosis.
Okay.
So Seymour, God rest his soul, when he was being interviewed to be a member of the Jung Institute, the panel of, very pompous and important Jungian analysts sit in a semicircle and ask you questions for 3 hours.
Can you imagine? I would love that.
Anyway, it's another story. But they said, how useful do you think diagnosis is? And he says, well, the usefulness of diagnosis usually comes in handy when I get into arguments with my wife. Bastard. Anyway.
And then I can blame everything on that.
Well, it's just, they laughed, but that was, probably 40 years ago, and you could say things like that and not get canceled.
We have a sense of humor.
Anyway, so medication, you can talk about medication freely because you're not a licensed psychologist.
Yep. And I can talk about my own experience. I can also talk about the research and all this other stuff, which I think is really helpful because, and then nested in this topic is the idea that being diagnosed can be wildly validating. By my whole upbringing, I was told, like, you're too sensitive, your emotions are a problem, all this stuff. And I have panic disorder. So I actually consider myself to be in remission because I haven't had a panic attack in a long time. And I have a whole toolbox of things to deal with them. But I consider myself to be in remission. But getting the diagnosis was so validating. Like I actually cried because I was like, oh, I just thought I was like weak. Anyway, medication. So I have tried a bunch of different medications, and I find that so useful when I'm talking to clients about their decision to take medication or not. A lot of folks come in with a huge stigma and they don't want to try anything because they think it's only going to give them side effects. The way that you described it earlier is that you say that this could be something that could potentially help. It could be, kind of a crutch for a short period of time. If you're having panic attacks, it can make you feel better to even just have a medication with you, even if you don't take it, because it gives you the sense that you can kind of rescue yourself if you're in public. But I think it's just such crap that you can't really, because you're not supposed to talk about your experience with medication or medication at all, right?
Well, when I do talk about meds, I do a lot of preamble.
Yeah.
I say, hey, listen, I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, totally.
I am not permitted to tell you which medications to take, or I'm not permitted to even recommend medications.
Right.
I can tell you what other people have told me
Yeah.
about symptoms involving these medications and what I've experienced taking these medications. If you'd like to hear that, I can tell you that, but in no way, and I make it real fucking clear.
Super clear.
Because the patients will straight up ask me, like, should I be taking meds? I'm like, I can't answer that.
Right.
I really can't.
Right. Like it's not allowed.
It's not allowed. And it's also, I could say, hey, yeah, you should take this med, and you could take that med and you could do things like die.
Right.
Because your friend had some.
Right.
And you just took that because your therapist said you should take it.
Yeah.
And it does something horrible to you.
Right.
So I'm real careful with that stuff. What I also do is I say, look, what you need to do is you need to go to your psychiatrist or your doctor and sign a release information, have them call me, and I will talk to them about what I'm seeing.
Yeah.
And based on what I tell them, maybe they will prescribe you meds and maybe they won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I heard about this therapist in the 80s, this couples therapist who was giving her patients MDMA.
Why?
Her couples patients to help with connection.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, one of them died of a heart attack and she went to prison for like 20 years.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Can you believe that?
I've heard that recently with ketamine, and it scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of that whole movement. I really don't. I don't understand the laws and ethics around the psilocybin and ketamine. And ketamine's really powerful. The ketamine can kill you in the wrong amounts, Ketamine's it's a tranquilizer.
Yeah.
A
horse tranquilizer.
Horse tranquilizer or cat tranquilizer, one of the two.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of all that stuff. Anytime anybody asks me about that shit, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Well, my basic position is that in my opinion, it's dangerous because you don't know what you're going to unlock in your psyche.
Yeah.
That hallucinogenics in a way are more dangerous, not more dangerous than fentanyl, but they're dangerous in the sense that what if you open a door that was supposed to remain closed?
Yep. And then no one's there to help you integrate it because you went and did it with some random dude in white yoga pants in LA. Like, I think it's indicative of our reductive view of things where we're like, I have this problem and the thing I need to do is this one thing. And that will be the cure. If you're going to do that, there's really promising research, both about ketamine, actually about MDMA, about ketamine, and about psilocybin. But that research is being done in clinical settings that are very highly protected.
And I would recommend people listen to a podcast called the Uberman Lab.
Yeah.
Huberman Lab. He talks about all the research.
Yep.
If you have any questions, go listen to that guy.
Yeah.
He knows the things.
He does a really fair treatment of it.
He does.
And if you're going to do it, make sure that you do it in a clinical setting that has approval to do it and the integration work that needs to come after. Don't do it in someone's home. Don't do it as a one-off without any scaffolding. These experiences need to be integrated. Don't do it as a shamanic experience if what you're looking for is psychiatric benefit. The International Trauma Conference every year has a different theme, and psychedelics was the theme, I think 2 years ago. And it was really fascinating to see the research. Like, it is really promising, again, in these clinical settings where you have integration and also you have doctors there who can help. If you have a bad experience, there are things they can administer.
So let's talk about speaking, because that sounds like a future podcast, trauma and psychedelics and stuff, and your understanding of that. Let's talk about what's coming up. So this is the first in a series. Today was obviously diagnostics. And we are going to be doing a whole host of things. We're going to be talking about personality disorders. We're sort of covering the swath of the psychological landscape about where trauma sits, and we're going to eventually get to trauma, but these are kind of all primer courses, are they not?
Yeah, and we also want to give you kind of an overview of where the field is in general from two people who are in it.
Yeah.
And in different ways, but in it so that you can get a more holistic understanding of what's going on so you can advocate for yourself. field, the other things we had planned are kind of the current state of affairs. There we had flagged to talk about the explosion of telehealth, and then some more, I call this fuckery in the DSM, and then where the field is headed, and then a primer on personality disorders, and in particular how like sort of the quote unquote cluster Bs are being misused, and then
that's narcissism and
histrionic and borderline. And then an episode on psychopaths, sociopaths, and serial killers.
So we're looking at the whole field because MC is super smart and I'm learning lots.
And is also super smart.
I'm going to ignore that. And it's really awesome to have you in my back pocket.
Thank you. Same.
You are a powerful sorceress, and I fear you.
I'm just a huge nerd. There's no power.
You don't know.
I have a lot of books.
All sorceresses have books.
Do they? Oh, that's true.
You have books and potions.
Books and potions.
Don't you have potions? I'm sure I know you have potions.
I mean,
you and Tracy have potions.
I have like
Tracy kind of has lots of potions.
Tinted moisturizer.
You have tinted moisturizers. That's potions.
Tracy has potions for sure.
Tracy is like, oh, she's a good witch.
Yep. We're both good witches.
You are both good witches, and you live in Fairfax, which is perfect because that's where all the good witches live.
Exactly.
All right, listen. I think we're good. Thank you so much. That was a really excellent interview. Yes, yay. And we'll do another one in a few weeks or a month or so.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. As always, relevant information will appear in the program notes, such as the Patreon. Please subscribe. If you have a question or would like to be a guest on my show, please email me at benjaminrussick@gmail.com or check out my website at benjaminrussick.com. Thanks again, and catch you next time.